Hi, folks. This is Empowering Democracy once again. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. This is another Dump the Corruption show. And the topic of it is Break Up Bigger Medicine. I notice Dolores Pierce is here, and so is Jeffrey Denton. Maybe Steve Wolfbrandt will look for me. I hope so. Anyway, tonight I'll be discussing a tremendous article by Matt Stoller, which I will be sharing here. Okay, let me make sure this stream is being shared on Facebook. Facebook is something I never know about. Yes, it is being shared. Wonderful. Hey. Wonderful. I gotta share it myself. Okay. Right. So, hey, Andy Candy. Good to see you. Hey, Dolores, great to see you. Hey, Jeff Denton. Great to see you too. So I'm going to get right into the piece by Matt Stoller. I got it in Portside. Obamacare created big medicine. I don't think I agree with that title. I think big medicine existed before then, before Obamacare. That was one of the big problems with the healthcare system. But what I think happened is that Obamacare created bigger medicine. Anyway, the tagline is "Looking at American healthcare is an exercise in despair, with healthcare conglomerates engaged in killing people for profit, with endless 10 to 15% increases in annual premiums, and with judges and policymakers not even knowing where to start." This was on February 3rd, 2024 by Matt Stoller, and he wrote it for The Lever. Okay, Matt Stoller is a great sort of muckraking thinker, very, very big on corporate concentration. The author of the book, let's see, Goliath is the title. It's a great book on corporate concentration and the power of the large corporations. There's Obama signing the Affordable Care Act, actually the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. It was really the PPACA. It was the initial abbreviation of this. There are various people who are looking on. Okay, Nancy Pelosi, 14 years younger than she is today. Steny Hoyer. And of course, Joe Biden. I won't go through all the people in the picture, though I think I could identify most of the people in the picture, but that would be wasting time. The dominant trend of U.S. social life over the last 15 years is a stagnating and then declining lifespan. Right, our lifespans have actually been declining over the last 15 years. How do people feel about that? I know how they should feel. They should be hopping mad. Why aren't they hopping mad? There are many reasons for this trend, such as violence, diet, suicide, drug addiction, auto accidents. But for many reasons, our monopolistic healthcare system is a big part of the problem. That is Matt Stoller's focus. Okay, it's monopoly, it's regulation, it's constraining the monopolies. So monopolistic drug wholesalers fostered the opioid crisis. And now, for the same reason, they're creating shortages of prescription drugs. Untreated mental illness is a significant factor in elevated suicide rates. Not being able to get care when you need it is associated with higher levels of death and permanent injury. More fundamentally, knowing that there are no systems in place to protect or care for you undermines any sense of hope. So remember the last stream I did about the situation in Massachusetts, with the women's in Brigham Hospital? Okay. There are no systems in place to protect or care for you undermines any sense of hope, beginning to be the case even for the rich, as the point was brought home in that particular live stream. It's easy to describe what is happening as consistent with an overly pessimistic tale about the US, one that is almost uniquely American. The story goes that in the US, the richest country in the world, citizens can't get access to a doctor when they need it. Most of Europe and most countries globally have universal health care, and some have had it for more than a century. By contrast, we've never had it here. Yet Germany has had universal health care since it was introduced by Bismarck. I believe he introduced it in Prussia in the 1860s, certainly by the 1870s. I mean, that's 150 years ago, folks. And some have had it for more than a century. By contrast, we've never had it here. We almost achieved it multiple times. Teddy Roosevelt proposed it. So did Harry Truman, Richard Nixon, Jimmy Carter, and Bill Clinton. They failed, largely because of the powerful doctor lobby, the American Medical Association, standing against it. But if you look at the story from the perspective of most Americans instead of the system at large, the story is not so rigid. For much of the 20th century, the American healthcare system was one of very high quality with great doctors, hospitals, and an exceptionally innovative, if overpriced, pharmaceutical system. Access generally did increase quite dramatically. We organized our healthcare system by letting people collectively get together, pool their money, and use this pool to pay for medical care when any member needed it. From 1950 to 1965, the percentage of Americans with surgical coverage jumped from 36% to 72%. In the 1960s, as historian Alan Derrickson noted, quote, health insecurity became the exception rather than the rule, unquote. These pools are known as insurance companies, and today they represent the classic dilemma of using, quote, other people's money that Brandeis noted in the early 20th century. Even so, health insurance is very good to have, and in 2010, the uninsured population in the U.S. was 45 million, or 15% of the country. That's too many. Well, there has also been frustration that insurers don't cover what they should, trying to penny pinch and costing lives in the process. For most Americans, the assumption was that the care is pretty good, and it often was. So, access, not quality, is the fulcrum for political debate, along with some critiques of health insurers who refuse to fully cover necessary services. By the way, that problem, of course, as Kuttner made clear in his piece, okay, that I did in the earlier stream, uh, the quality of healthcare is rapidly declining. Yet over the last 20 years, says Matt Stoller, something fundamental in the American healthcare system has changed. It's not that people can't get insurance. Indeed, America is more insured than it has ever been. It is that the underlying quality inside the health system is falling apart. One obvious signpost, of course, is that doctors and distributors and pharmaceutical companies helped hook Americans on heroin-style substances from the late 1990s onward, leading to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. But it's more than that scandal, as gruesome as it is. Americans spend more on care and get less than any other country. And the reason for the dysfunctional care is that since the passage of Obamacare, the firms who control our healthcare system have become far bigger, and much more powerful. The hospital sector, for instance, represents a third of healthcare spending. Starting in the 1980s and accelerating after Obamacare, hospital systems have merged into giant monopolies, driving huge price hikes and increasingly poor quality. Private equity has come into everything from ambulances to urgent care to nursing homes. Uh, uh, Also, monopolistic group purchasing organizations have created shortages among hundreds of drugs, which reduce the quality of care. These are known problems and real. But the one area where we've seen the emergence of a different and fundamentally corrupt business model is the insurer space. In 2007, for instance, United Health Group, one of the country's biggest insurers, had total revenues of 75 billion. 2022, the firm, having expanded far beyond insurance, had annual revenue of 325 billion. CVS Health, which bought insurance giant Aetna in 2018, had a similar trajectory with 76 billion of revenue in 2007 and 326 to 22 billion in 2022. United Healthcare is not just an insurer. It employs around 50,000 physicians. It sells software. CVS is the largest pharmacy chain in the country and has a network of clinics, while Humana is now the biggest provider of home healthcare services in the country. Insurers control home health agencies, ambulance providers, and data management firms, as well as pharmaceutical middlemen. Consider a few recent stories about how these firms operate. Last year, ProPublica and the Capital Forum did 2 investigations into the health industry. In one study, their reporters profiled a United Healthcare customer named Christopher McNaughton, who suffers from a crippling case of ulcerative colitis and requires expensive medicine. United Healthcare didn't want to pay, so it rejected claims paying for McNaughton's health care, deeming it, quote, not medically necessary, unquote, and lying about what his own doctors said. McNaughton's doctor fought for him, he sued, and he was able to keep paying for medicine and stay alive. But it was horrific. In another separate story, reporters found that Cigna, encouraged by private equity, engineered its system so that customers who filed claims for care would be automatically rejected. This practice of denying care to those who paid for it is likely industry-wide. One might ask why customers would buy insurance from firms who automatically denied claims. Once again, it's a monopoly issue. Today, 3/4 of markets are highly concentrated, and almost half have one insurer with more than 50% of the market. Most people can't choose their insurer, their employer chooses for them. And it's compelling to buy from a big insurer because it's more likely a local doctor and hospital are in their local network at better rates. Uh, okay, so Mr. McNaughton, after years of lawsuits, still buys his insurance from United Healthcare, other people's money. What is weird about the American healthcare fiasco exposed by ProPublica and the Capital Forum is that we had supposedly addressed it. 14 years ago, America had a bitter debate over healthcare access, and President Barack Obama won his fight for what was ostensibly universal healthcare. There were also supposedly rules about denying people coverage. 2010, the United States Congress passed the Affordable Care Act, Patient Protection, and Affordable Care Act. And President Obama signed it into law. This law was largely targeted at the payers of the system, insurers, and not so much providers, the entities who deliver care, such as hospitals, doctors, clinics, pharmaceutical companies, ambulances, etc. The passage of this law was fraught. Obama didn't want to let private insurers sabotage his healthcare crusade the way they did Bill Clinton's attempts in the early 1990s, the so-called Hillary Care, unquote. The strategy Obama chose was to co-opt insurers with sticks and carrots. The stick was that if they didn't get on board, they'd be punished with a genuine national system that might push them out of the market. Now, the carrots were more extensive. The law forced millions of people to become customers of these private insurers. It also expanded the health insurance program for the poor, known as Medicaid, which could be profitable for private insurers. Finally, Obama didn't stop private insurers from privatizing Medicare, which remains enormously profitable for them, so the insurers got on board. Despite these concessions, health policy wonks generally liked what Obama had done because it took on the main problem, which was, as they saw it, access. Obamacare was designed to expand health insurance coverage to most people who didn't have it. And in that sense, it actually delivered. The number of uninsured Americans dropped from 45 million to 27 million within just a few years. But notice, please, folks, it dropped from 45 million to 27 million by what, 2015 or something like that. It was passed in 2010, didn't begin to operate in a limited fashion until 2013, didn't begin to operate full blown until 2014, and it still left 27 million people uncovered. It didn't get universal access, didn't accomplish what it was designed to accomplish. It divided the whole country in very different ways. When the Republicans came in, they immediately began to sabotage it. And they did come in part because Obamacare wasn't a big success. Had he passed the Medicare for All bill, and he was able to push that through. He had enough senators, he had enough House people. There could have been major defections. It could have been pushed through if he was willing to stop the filibuster, use the nuclear option, which was known at that time. He did not. Yet something was off. Obama had promised on the campaign trail he would sign a universal health care bill into law, one that would cut the cost of a typical family's premium up to $2,500 a year. In 2004, the average insured family of four paid $11,192 in health care costs. By 2022, that amount was $30,260. That increase in cost for a family of four is the price of a small car every single year. And that's because prices have gone up, not because there are more doctors' beds or care. While Obamacare did expand access, it didn't address the key problem in the U.S. healthcare system, which was monopoly power. So prices kept rising and still are. To understand how it went so wrong, it helps to look at the one key place where policymakers tried to impose real cost controls on insurers and how that attempt backfired. The provision of the law most hated by payers during the Obamacare vote was known as the Medicare loss ratio, a provision authored by then Senator Al Franken, which required insurers to spend a certain minimum percentage of the premiums they collect on medical care compared to administrative costs, including executive salaries. For some plans, the minimum was 80%. For others, it was 85%. If insurers spent below that amount, they would have to mail the difference out as a rebate to customers. The medical loss ratio was essentially a public utility rate by regulation, capping profits for private health insurers. And it made a lot of sense intuitively. Payers could make some money, but they would have to spend on care. If they didn't spend what they collected, they had to return extra money, which means they had an incentive to lower prices. At first, this provision seemed to work. The healthcare nonprofit Kaiser Family Foundation reported that consumers saved an average of 7.5% of their health insurance within the first few years, as payers mailed out hundreds of millions of dollars every year to customers. And here's the graph, okay, of the rebates. Okay. But after the passage of the Affordable Care Act in 2010, health insurance companies pursued a variety of strategies to increase profits. They focused on different kinds of products, especially Medicare Advantage plans targeted at older Americans, and they sought to buy up their rivals, hoping to bulk up. Aetna tried to buy Cigna, and Anthem sought to combine with Humana. They were so-called horizontal mergers, which is to say firms seeking to combine with rivals who sold the same products they did. Their goal was to simply grow their way out of the problem. If you can only make a 15 or 20% margin, well, at least you can still increase your revenue. In both cases, however, the Obama Antitrust Division sued and won. So insurance companies executive figured out another strategy. Why not become more than a health insurance business? After all, if you're both a payer and a provider, you can tap into that other 85% by directing insurance money, okay, to providers you control. So that suggests what has to be done about this. Prohibit insurance companies from being both the payers and the providers. You can stop that. So a new kind of merger trend in healthcare accelerated. Not horizontal acquisitions, but what are called vertical mergers. Health insurance giants stopped trying to buy each other, started to buy or be bought by entities with whom they negotiate to buy services. It was payers buying or being bought by providers. Before the medical loss ratio, quote, payers, quote unquote, which is to say insurers whose job was to buy billions of dollars of goods and services for their customers, sort of had an incentive to hold costs down. They usually did this by being jerks to customers, denying them care they needed. Once the government capped insurance profits at 15% of insurance revenues, these firms had a different incentive. They sought higher revenue and higher spending instead of cost controls. They wanted to buy providers so they could get access to that other 85% of the revenue. What better way to make money than being both the buyer and the seller? Richard G. Frank and Conrad Milhaupt from Brookings noted this trend last year. Payers could buy providers and then send revenue to related businesses. Two firms leading the charge were United Health Group, there they are again, and CVS. United Health, one of the big four insurers, formed a subsidiary in 2011, right after the passage of Obamacare, known as Optum. Optum began rolling up physicians' practices, software and analytics firms, also medical clinics, and pharmaceutical middlemen. In 2018, CVS, which owned large pharmacy chains and the pharmacy benefit manager Caremark, bought the health insurer Aetna. Earlier this year, CVS completed its acquisition of Signify Health in Oak Street. 2018, Cigna bought Express Scripts, the largest pharmacy benefit manager in the country. Humana bought Kindred, a healthcare delivery firm. Elevance, but formerly Anthem, became a pharmacy benefit manager and cut deals with a large number of medical providers. 2019, United Health sent 18% of its payer revenue to itself, while CVS's Aetna sent 13% to its own clinics and pharmacies. That number has no doubt increased rather dramatically over the last 3 years. The need for a Glass-Steagall in healthcare. There have been hundreds of acquisitions since the Affordable Care Act was signed, and the American healthcare system is now a wholly different beast. Talking about insurers or pharmacy benefit managers or drugstore chains or doctor practices in isolation simply doesn't make sense anymore. We are dominated by healthcare conglomerates. A few years ago, the Drug Channels Institute showed this dynamic with an infamous chart purely in the drug middleman space, mapping out immense and confusing consolidation and there the vertical relationships among all of the different companies. It's just a mess. It's a networked mess. Okay. The shift in the practice of American medicine has become fundamental. You simply cannot hang a shingle and become an independent doctor or pharmacist because it is impossible to be reimbursed in any reasonable manner. Becoming a doctor today means you're going to be an employee of a giant conglomerate or hospital chain. And the prices for consumers, whether through premiums, deductibles, co-insurance, or any of the other sadistic methods dreamed up by healthcare actuaries, are higher and more confusing. Healthcare benefits increasingly include consulting services to help navigate healthcare benefits, which is insane. And that's if you're well off. The heart of the problem is that there's a conflict of interest between being a payer and being a provider. If I'm choosing to spend money on behalf of a customer and I'm also on the other side of the transaction, I have an incentive to steer that purchase to where I benefit and not solely for the benefit of the customer. To address these kinds of conflicts in previous years in history, we've regulated industries to prohibit certain forms of vertical integration. 30 Rock's clip on vertical integration explains conceptually what these kinds of mergers do. In the 1990s, for instance, was pharmaceutical firms owned pharmaceutical middlemen. The FTC forced them to divest their pharmacy benefit managers to make sure they would have no incentive to promote certain drugs over others. There are also a host of laws like anti-price steering provisions, anti-kickback laws, and laws like the Robinson-Patman Act that blocks conflicts of interest across a variety of industries. The Glass-Steagall regime was one such law in banking that kept investment and commercial banking apart, but there have been many others. Over time, economists and policymakers came to think of vertical mergers as harmless or even efficiency enhancing. So when the Affordable Care Act passed, uh, uh, over time, you should have had neoliberal economists and policymakers, because that's what was at issue. Okay. Congress didn't do much to prohibit conflicts of interest, as the goal was access to a system that most wonks thought was pretty good. Instead, Congress capped insurer profits through the medical loss by ratio. But without prohibiting the combination of providers and payers, this well-meaning public utility profit cap, combined with new demand for insurance, instead forced a dramatic roll-up of power. Today, CVS and United Health Group are healthcare tyrants, and everyone else must keep pace either through mergers or other aggressive merger-like contracting practices. So what are the costs of this vertically integrated health space? The underlying quality of care is declining as healthcare conglomerates focus on exploiting conflicts of interest. Consider 3 legal actions in recent years. In March 2022, CVS Health was sued under the False Claims Act for fraud. A whistleblower alleges that CVS was lying to its insurance customers, forcing them to buy more expensive brand name drugs when cheaper generic drugs were available. The reason CVS would lie to customers is that it would get payments on the back end from pharmaceutical producers whose products it had helped sell. Many customers couldn't afford these higher prices, even though the government had paid for CVS to give them a Medicare drug plan that covered the cost. Similarly, last March, Ohio Attorney General David Yost sued Cigna's Express Scripts subsidiary, as well as the Humana Pharmacy Solutions, calling these firms, quote, modern gangsters, unquote, for raising prices on people who needed medicine and cutting revenue to independent pharmacists. Yost wasn't the only aggressive regulator. Oklahoma Insurance Commissioner Glenn Moretti threatened to strip CVS of its right to operate in the state as a pharmaceutical middleman because the firm forced patients to use its poor quality mail order and retail pharmacies instead of their preferred pharmacies, and then they lied about it. All 3 of these actions came about because the entity was a payer, also known as it was buying things for a client as well as a provider, which is to say it was selling stuff to that client. And it's getting worse because the judiciary doesn't recognize the threat of such vertical mergers. Of course, because the judiciary is bored, aren't they? CVS purchase of Signify. Another cost is low-level forms of fraud and monopolization, especially when we spend the most on healthcare, especially where we spend the most on healthcare, on the elderly. Since the early 2000s, the U.S. has been privatizing the Medicare system. Thank you, George Bush. Most people above 65 now have their health insurance paid for by the government, but choose from among multiple private plans in what is known as the Medicare Advantage program. The Medicare Advantage market has rapidly become one of the largest sources of spending for the federal government, accounting for $361 billion of federal spending in 2021, and is expected to grow to an astounding $943 billion by 2031 as the population ages. Along with this growth is waste, taxes overpaid, Medicare Advantage health insurers by as much as $25 billion. in 2020 alone, meaning nearly 8% of all spending in the program could have been overpayment. The largest health insurance companies, unsurprisingly, have been capturing the market to monopolize profits. The top four plan providers control around 62% of Medicare Advantage plans, with even greater concentration at the local levels. And it's getting worse, precisely because of the lack of a separation between payers and providers. Last year, CVS Health acquired one of the critical cogs in the Medicare overpayment scheme, okay, the dominant, quote, in-home evaluation, unquote, company, Signify Health, in an $8 billion deal. This acquisition is a classic payer-provider conflict of interest. Signify Health is the number one provider of in-home health evaluations for Medicare Advantage patients. Signify is a network of over 10,000 traveling nurse practitioners and physicians across the country who drive to Medicare Advantage patients' houses to perform in-home evaluations, generally last around an hour, supposedly trying to help with the preventive care. Signify charges Medicare Advantage plans around $330 per patient visit. Why are the plans willing to pay $330 per visit for a 1 hour service that may not actually lead to improved care or lower costs, but through preventative care? The answer lies in the way Medicare Advantage plans are paid. Since Medicare Advantage pays out a fixed amount per patient, and patients can have vastly different expected costs depending on their pre-existing conditions, Medicare system developed a system to compensate Medicare Advantage plans for taking on riskier patients. The health care status of a patient is called the risk score, which is calculated using a formula that considers all diagnostic and existing conditions of a patient. For example, if a patient has diabetes, all else equal, that patient will have a higher risk score than a patient without diabetes, and the government will pay the Medicare Advantage plan more per month for insuring that patient. This intuitively makes sense, but in practice can lead to abuse of the system, where plans attempt to make their populations appear less healthy than they actually are. As it turns out, Signify's annual visit are an excellent opportunity to, quote, diagnose, unquote, unquote, patients, and there have been accusations that Signify pushes their doctors to aggressively diagnose conditions so that plans can be paid for patient conditions that they have no intention of proactively treating. This is not simply idle speculation. October 22nd, the DOJ, Department of Justice, sued Cigna, alleging these practices are fraudulent. Okay, the DOJ's claim alleges, quote, diagnostic codes were based solely on forms completed by vendors retained and paid by Cigna to conduct in-home assessments of plan members. This brings us to CVS's acquisition of Signify. Although Signify has already faced allegations of pushing hard to diagnose patients with conditions that would drive up risk scores, it is inevitable that it will have even more incentives to drive up risk scores under the ownership of CVS. Currently, Signify can be motivated to push higher risk scores to please its customers. However, Signify, as an independent company, at least has a layer of separation from the profits received by these customers from increasing risk scores. Once Signify is owned by CVS, a risk score that increases payments from the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CVS's insurance subsidiary Aetna, will directly benefit the corporate entity. CVS management will know this and be incentivized to push the people who work for Signify to diagnose more aggressively, driving increased revenue, costing the federal government and taxpayers. Signify is the largest in-home evaluation provider in the country. Its only significant competition coming from its much smaller competitor, which is the Matrix Medical Network. Signify's largest customers, apart from Aetna, CVS, are Humana and United Health. These massively vertical integrated healthcare companies are likely to have the bargaining power to remain important customers of Signify. After all, Signify will need additional volume besides just the Aetna customers to profitably maintain its 10,000 person network of clinicians. The real victims will be smaller Medicare Advantage plans that threaten to bring competition to the Medicare Advantage market, currently signified as incentivized to work with all health plans in order to maximize in-home health evaluation volume, and revenue. Uh, After the deal, CVS will have the ability to monitor upstart Medicare Advantage plans and either explicitly refuse to service plans that threaten to take up market share or provide a degraded and more expensive product to slow their growth. Okay, I'm running out of time to do the rest of this, so I'm going to stop. Well, actually, I'm going to get to the last section. So what now? Why didn't the Antitrust Division challenge this acquisition? Well, in 2022, the Antitrust Division tried to do something about vertical consolidation, suing to block United Health Group's purchase of Change Health, which is a dominant payment network in the healthcare system. But Judge Carl Nichols ruled against the DOJ, partly on the grounds that vertical mergers are usually not harmful. United Health wouldn't want to jeopardize its reputation by taking advantage of customers by spying on them, the judge claimed. So it's possible that when analyzing the Signify merger or the similar acquisitions, Antitrust Division is leery of a vertical merger challenge, fear of losing again and wasting resources. Well, I've said enough here to indicate that this is a vast problem for legislation as well. Obviously, extreme regulation is needed. Obviously, breakup of companies is needed, so there's no vertical integration in the system. So apart from passing Medicare for All to get things right in the healthcare industry, you're going to have to break up, the conglomerates. So again, here's the message. And I'm sure you probably know what this message is. It is you have to get a Congress, you have to get a president, you have to get a Supreme Court that is friendly to the people. That's what you have to do. And to do that, you have to dump the corruption. You have to vote according to the rule. There is no other way to do it. There is absolutely no other way to do it. So one could try to get legislation out of this Congress to break up the conglomerates. This Congress or the Congress that's shaping up in 2024. Good luck. That will never happen. That will never happen. It will only happen if you want to break up the concentration in the healthcare industry. The only way to do it is going to be to dump the corruption. If you want to get a Medicare for All bill, the only way to do it is through dump the corruption. If you want to lift the quality of healthcare by legislating, regulating these companies, which must be done, you have to dump, the corruption. So that's all I have to say, about this. I'll have a third stream going on tonight. It will be after D. Pierce stream, which is going on right now, and I have to get over there. So I will. Thank you very much for coming, folks. And hopefully I'll see you somewhere in the 10 o'clock time frame. I don't know exactly when. And I hope I can make that a shorter stream than this one. This one was 39 minutes. My first one was roughly 20 minutes or something like that. I'm aiming for 20 minutes for all of these streams. I obviously didn't make it because this article was so great and there was so much to say. Thank you very much. I'm going to end the stream now.